Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see everyone. We'll look to get started. It's a good morning. I thank the many with the Pennsylvania Leadership Conference, Loman Henry, everyone that puts all the details together. It's going to be a great day. And we're really kicking off with a key important topic, so I appreciate everyone that's here. Looking to discuss marijuana legalization. So I know Governor Shapiro is going to probably come up a few times today. One thing with Governor Shapiro, if you had noticed, in his budget address, he prioritized this issue. There wasn't a specific plan that he had with it. He does want to tax the sale of marijuana and high-potency THC products at 20%. And there certainly are efforts in other states. We see in states like Florida, the ballot referendum that was defeated there, Governor DeSantis speaking out against the full legalization. And we have a different setup here in Pennsylvania. It's not a ballot initiative. We're looking on this issue. It's going to be our state elected officials, state representatives, state senators that are tackling this. And there's certainly a variety of opinions. And one to highlight would be our current appropriation chairs in both the House and Senate. You have the House Appropriations Chair currently is Representative Jordan Harris. And his take on this, I want to highlight, if you look at the screen here, where he stands on legalization.
We know that cannabis is not dangerous. We know that cannabis is not addictive. And we know that the only thing that is in jeopardy when we legalize cannabis is potato chips. And somebody said, and Fritos. All right.
So that is one perspective. There is also in the Senate Appropriations Chair, Senator Scott Martin, who has pointed to the ripple effects of the social costs, economic costs. Particularly, he brings up the human toll that would happen with regards to the commercialization of marijuana for recreational use. So who's right? We have different opinions that we see in our elected officials. So what I'm excited for, we have an all-star panel here, and I'm excited to get into this discussion of what marijuana legalization is and what it's doing in other states. So I'll start down here. Judge Cheryl Allen, she really has devoted much of her life to helping families, helping children as a former teacher. She spent decades in the juvenile court system and was elected in 2007 to serve as our Superior Court judge. She's currently of counsel with Pennsylvania Family Institute as well as the Independence Law Center. Also we have here Dr. Tom Copeland. He is currently the Director of Development for the Mountain States Legal Foundation, which does pro bono work to defend really the rights enshrined in our Constitution, which amen to that. And right now he lives in Colorado. He grew up in Western Pennsylvania, spent time on faculty at Geneva College, so he's familiar with Pennsylvania and has some roots here, so thanks for being here. And Mr. David Taylor, a good friend and certainly a great supporter of the Pennsylvania Leadership Conference. He's the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association, representing those in Pennsylvania that make things across the Commonwealth. So definitely a critical voice here in Pennsylvania. So thank you for being here. Thank you all three of you for being here. My name is Dan Bartkowiak. I serve as Chief Strategy Officer with Pennsylvania Family Institute. And again, I'm really just excited to get this conversation going because it is something that's being talked about more in Pennsylvania and really the specifics of really the reality of what is happening. And so that's why I want to turn first to Dr. Copeland, certainly coming from a state that has experimented with legalization. Before your current role, you were the Director of Research at the Centennial Institute, and that is part of Colorado Christian University. They conducted a well-cited study that has been often brought up here in even Pennsylvania that looked at marijuana legalization in Colorado and found in terms of the costs, for every dollar in marijuana tax revenue, $4.50 to mitigate costs, the effects of legalization. So could you kind of highlight more of what that study was, really the groundbreaking work that did?
Right, so in 2018, Colorado was 6 years into legalization of recreational marijuana, and we put together a study. We hired a really good data analytics firm to gather all the best data that we could find, at least at that point, on marijuana usage and all of those social costs in the state. The Colorado Department of Public Health kept some statistics. We also used government data from surveys and so on in the census. But we also then conducted interviews with school officials and doctors in the ER and law enforcement to get their perspective on what was happening. And we recognized, right, as Dan said, $4.50 in actual social costs for every $1 in tax revenue. And what that meant was things like overdose rates went up. You had far more calls to poison control. Something like half of the calls to poison control in Colorado still are for marijuana exposure, and roughly half of those are for children under the age of 5. So that's what you can look forward to in Pennsylvania, would be additional calls to poison control for small children. There were a lot of social costs in terms of high school dropouts. Suicide rates in Colorado are extremely high. There's some research that maybe there's even a correlation between high altitude and brain development of teenagers. I think anything is possible with brain development of teenagers, for better, for worse. So there were effects there. Traffic accidents increased, fatalities increased. And even at that point in 2018, there was no good field sobriety test for marijuana. You know, they've been able to, so they could track when they had someone pulled over for DUI, they could readily do the field sobriety test for alcohol, but not for drugs. But the latest I've seen is that somewhere, maybe 2/3 of Coloradans admit to driving high periodically. And if you drive through any town, it's not just downtown Denver, which is a horrible place now. Anywhere you go, if you open your car window, every other vehicle, you can smell the marijuana coming out from it. So, again, if you acknowledge the impact that marijuana usage has on driving, you're going to see more fatalities, right? You're going to see more overdoses as well. For states that have fully legalized everything, the overdose rate is something like 38 per 100,000. If you keep with fully legalized in both medical and recreational marijuana. So Colorado is in that category of high overdose state because of those things. And there's a strong correlation between attitudes towards marijuana consumption and use of cocaine or other drugs. So I'll leave you with one number, and I'll pause and we'll keep going. Number one, Colorado is now number one in cocaine usage in the country. So this is no longer Miami Vice or images of drug gangs in New York or something. This is right there in Colorado, number one in cocaine usage. And I don't think it's just a happenstance that we're 13 years into legalization of recreational marijuana, and that's the kind of knock-on effect that you're seeing.
If I could direct to the screen, there's a slide that highlights the study that you performed. It looks, again, at the economic, social cost. Really, as I talked to you, it's really the human toll that we see. And there's a variety of areas. Healthcare is certainly one key area, productivity, crime, the environment even. There's a variety of areas that you looked at. And so could you maybe even elaborate, as a resident of Colorado, what you're seeing even now? Like, certainly the study has been a few years now. And what have you seen really that has continued to play out what the study found several years ago that you're seeing in Colorado?
Well, quality of life has been the biggest thing that's been impacted. Again, whether it's your ability to get in to see a doctor or be seen in the emergency room because they're tied up with drug cases. The courts are clogged with drug cases. Even though recreational marijuana is legal, because it's connected to so many other types of crime, our crime rate is extremely high in Colorado. Downtown Denver, people just won't go because of the crime rate, the drug use, homelessness, and of course Denver decided to become a sanctuary city, so that hasn't helped the situation at all. The state has reallocated funding. We were told in Colorado that if we had recreational marijuana, the tax revenue would fully fund schools and transportation and parks, and I think there's probably an echo here in Pennsylvania, right? Only good things will come from this. But the state continued to overspend on a variety of other priorities, and they've got a $1.2 billion hole in the budget because they've overspent on other things. Marijuana taxes are down $150 million just in the last 2 or 3 years after the spike of COVID. So they keep coming back to taxpayers for higher fees and taxes and so on. But the quality of life, just the general level of not just everybody that you go to, service at a restaurant or a retail outlet. Many of the employees are high already. So there's that sort of lived experience. I talked about driving and so on. And Colorado's are getting fed up with it. We're not to the point where Oregon is, where they're actually recriminalizing or talking about recriminalizing some things. But we just, a citizen referendum 2 years ago allowed recreational use of psychedelic mushrooms. Because, what else do you need when you're feeling a bit blue? You just need to have some psychedelic shrooms. Yeah. So the quality of life has really changed. But I'll just say one other thing then. One concern that I have in the way that even our report talks about social costs and quality of life leaves it kind of out there. It's a generic cost in some ways, but the actual human cost is so much more important in the lives of these high schoolers who commit suicide under the influence of THC, and the children that go to the ER because they've been poisoned by marijuana gummies and so on. There are real people on the receiving and acting end of all this. And so I think conservatives have to do a better job probably generally of telling stories, and there are so many individual stories that are coming to sort of sad conclusions or sad episodes because of what's happening in Colorado.
And I echo that. I think a mom like Laura Stack from Colorado who saw her son start using marijuana and the high potency and becoming addicted, and then sadly ended up committing suicide. I mean, it's real situations, that the addictive nature of high potency THC. So I appreciate, yes, certainly the insights. I want to turn, Judge Allen, certainly in your time through the criminal justice system, really, the substance abuse that tears families apart and young people that have been influenced by it. Would you share some of those experiences that you've seen with so many families that you have seen through the court system?
I'm always amazed at the degree to which those who are proposing legalization of recreational marijuana completely ignore the toll that marijuana use has taken on families. Because there's a reason why our government saw fit to rule this to be a controlled substance, because it is very injurious to families and especially to children. And that was and I'm talking about the marijuana of the 1990s when I served in juvenile court, in the early 2000s when I served again in criminal court. Today's marijuana is far more potent than even at that time. So when I hear people talk about criminal justice reform and the toll that it's taken with regard to people of color in particular being overly incarcerated, they completely ignore the fact that a disproportionate number of families who have been broken and destroyed because of substance abuse is disproportionately minority families and people of color also. And the toll that it takes on young people, cognitively speaking, educationally, our children are already behind academically, and this just exacerbates the problem. And it's clear that the only thing that will come out of this is further destruction of the family, which will contribute to the further breakdown of our society. It will obviously increase crime and the expense. Many people don't realize that if a juvenile is in need of drug and alcohol treatment, and they refuse to participate in that treatment, parents can take them to juvenile court and the judge can order it. But who pays for that? The taxpayers. And so when I consider the overall impact on the community as a whole, to hear people talk about this is our reparations, or somehow our community the community is going to benefit from this, it's just ridiculous, because a handful of people may benefit initially. And I say initially because I believe ultimately the corporate conglomerates will control the whole thing. But initially a few people may benefit, but the impact to the overall community will be devastating, to a community that's already been devastated. So.
Certainly the potency level. And what have you, I know with the amount of families that you would see, as a judge, if there was some substance abuse, was marijuana often part of that? Was it a beginning drug? Was it, what would?
Drug. In fact, when you would ask a teenager, are you using any illegal drugs? They would say, oh no, I smoke marijuana. So the perception is that marijuana was this harmless substance, but my response would always be, every crack addict and heroin addict I know started smoking marijuana. So that's when marijuana was considered to be a gateway drug. But I think today, given the high levels of THC potency, it's no longer considered to be a gateway drug. It is highly addictive, standing on its own.
David, bringing into the conversation, certainly from an employer perspective, it's a key topic when it comes to this discussion that's happening here in Harrisburg. So what would you say are the concerns from an employer perspective with the legalization of marijuana for recreational use?
Well, I sort of need to back in. I'm going to start at the end and then take us to the beginning. So I represent, as you said, the people who make things, and that manufacturing in Pennsylvania is one of the main contributors to our economy. It's $100 billion of value added every year. It's over a 500,000 jobs on the plant floor, and that because manufacturing is the sector that adds the most value, that those jobs have among the best wages and benefits in the marketplace. So these are family-sustaining jobs, and it also has the strongest multiplier effect on job creation. So this is really critical to the well-being of our economy. Our manufacturing employers are significant local taxpayers. So again, the well-being of our communities, to have a strong local tax base for public services and to have the opportunity for family-sustaining jobs. So Pennsylvania has a workforce crisis in that our employers can't find enough workers who have the skills or who are trainable to fully staff up at current levels of production. So it winds up being a cap on economic growth. And that one of the contributing factors, I'm not going to say that it's the only one or the biggest one, but one of the contributing factors is that people can't pass a pre-employment drug screening. So you think about a manufacturing work environment, and you think about the factors that are in play. You have heavy machinery, bladed instruments, extreme temperatures, high voltage, chemical reactions, a lot of significant things happening where people could get hurt or, God forbid, killed. And so in manufacturing, all of our licenses and insurances, all the things that allow us to operate, they presuppose a safe workplace. And so in light of this, if we would have the Commonwealth support the mass commercialization of recreational marijuana, that inevitably we would be reducing the already too small pool of potential workers to be able to take up these family-sustaining jobs. And to put it in perspective, responding to Representative Harris, who I like very much and who is a good person. He's not a bad guy, he's just wrong. That the only thing that marijuana is a danger to is potato chips. Well, if you want to have one of the really great jobs at the Hearst potato chip factory in Nottingham in Lancaster County, you have to pass a drug test first. Because you have, oh my gosh, slicers and boiling oil and conveyor belts and stuff. And so, again, the opportunity cost that would occur making an already bad situation worse is something that we really should avoid. When you're in a hole, stop digging. And beyond that, when Governor Shapiro puts this in his budget, at the same time he is saying that he wants workforce development so that more people can take up jobs in manufacturing, healthcare, and childcare. Well, all of those jobs require pre-employment background checks and drug tests. You can't work in a healthcare context if and have access to other people's prescriptions if you yourself are a drug user. And, as I said, in the manufacturing space, the Pennsylvania workers' comp law is not optional. OSHA is not optional. Like, none of this is my opinion. This is just the reality if you can't pass the drug test, we can't have you on the plant floor. And as a result, people miss out on the opportunity to take up one of these family-sustaining jobs. And I really don't think, pointing to something that the judge said, I don't think people, especially younger people, appreciate the ways in which they are making themselves unemployable by being marijuana users. And so I just think that it's terribly irresponsible. And of course, just one last point, whether it is the state stores or the state lottery or the casinos, every one of these activities where the Commonwealth gets a piece of the action, inevitably the Commonwealth becomes an encourager of those activities. So my nightmare scenario is that we would have the Commonwealth itself working against workforce development and workplace safety.
And I think what you're hitting there, especially from a young adult perspective, is the concern. If I could draw attention to the screen again, oftentimes when we bring up the issue, you might think of just the marijuana flower, and maybe it's harmless. And 20 years ago, it was 0% THC. That's not what commercialization is all about. What it impacts for the business community, but so many communities. This is what I see with commercialization. You've got gummies that are acting like a mascot for companies. On the top right is an advertisement for a pumpkin carving contest in New Jersey at a marijuana dispensary, using Disney characters to advertise. Who's that appealing to? There's so much, the percentage of THC that has risen. You can get even here in Pennsylvania from a medical perspective, upwards of 90% THC. There's a variety of contents using Santa in so many of these, kid-friendly products. Again, that has an impact when it comes to the advertising, when it comes to what is for sale, what is going to proliferate so many communities here in Pennsylvania. So I do appreciate many that bring up the concerns. And one that I appreciate is the Post-Gazette, Pittsburgh Post-Gazette editorial board just wrote this week on this issue and looked at Governor Shapiro's proposal and saying we really are opposed to what this is suggesting for Pennsylvania. I quote what they said is, quote, "There is too much yet unknown about the long-term effects of cannabis use, especially concentrated THC, for Pennsylvania to take the dramatic step of full legalization," end quote. And they gave 3 reasons why they oppose this type of legalization. Certainly, the first is the mixed results we see in states that are experimenting with legalization. The second is health concerns, the rise in potency as we've been talking, the concerns with cannabis use disorder, kind of the term used for addiction, mental health problems that have risen that are connected with particularly high potency THC. And then also the third reason they gave was big corporations, the big tobacco companies that are coming in and dominating the market and what that does from an advertising, what that does for, frankly, targeting young users. So I wanted to use that as a framework. And first, Dr. Copeland, kind of the mixed results we see in states. They pointed in the Post-Gazette editorial board, particularly the good evidence that exists for the ER, rise in ER visits, and particularly young people, even kindergarten and under, being exposed to marijuana edibles, concentrates. And then also from a driving perspective, the increase in accidents, fatalities, those things. Is that what we're seeing? I know you've touched on that, but if you could elaborate more in specifically some of those areas that you're seeing in a state like Colorado.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. I mentioned earlier that statistics on traffic fatalities have gone up significantly. This combination of driving high and drunk at the same time is, it's every day. And it's to the point where the news doesn't really report much on those accidents because it's no longer news that people are driving, under multiple influences in a lot of cases. And those medical costs, right, from poison control to ER visits to lost days of productivity for workers because of medical complications from marijuana usage and so on. So Colorado is seeing all of those things. And I wonder at some point if big marijuana is going to follow the same trajectory as big tobacco, where initially what happens, they pay some doctors to recommend. You've probably seen the advertisements for cigarettes back in the early 30s and 40s of the 20th century. They pay some doctors to say this has all kinds of benefits. Everyone should, give your kids cigarettes. they hide the information about what the negative effects are for decades, and then ultimately, people recognize the horrible costs of this promotion of nicotine effectively, and ultimately the big tobacco companies get sued for damages for the harm that they've caused. I think eventually we'll see that with marijuana. We're just not to the point yet where, I mean, we're seeing the impacts. It's not that it's not evident. I just don't know that we're, at least Colorado, is to the point where we're ready to actually push back on those on the big companies and say, no, you're poisoning our people.
And I think what's exacerbated the problem is that potency increase. I was somewhat in high school about 20 years ago, and potency level of marijuana, the flower, was single digit, 3% THC. Vaping wasn't around yet. And so now today you have the average potency level of dry flowers, 20%, up to 30% THC. And then the concentrates, edibles, 60, 70, 80, 90% THC, the psychoactive component, obviously, that creates the high. You have these products that are just so new and the impact that it's having. So that's all. Judge Allen, I'd say with regards to that potency level, what are more of those concerns? Obviously, you brought up from a young people's perspective, but the addiction rates that we're seeing, the problems from an industry that has said we want to make this as strong of a product as possible. What has that translated into?
Well, from the court's perspective, you see tremendous increases in mental health treatment because it's been pretty much proven that these high potency levels produce psychoses in some people. Anyone who is is prone to suffer from schizophrenia, that is more than likely going to be exacerbated, and we see such a rise in crime because of the psychotic episodes that people suffer from. And I listen to the governor, I listen to the lawmakers who are pushing this, and I ask myself, how can you justify creating an industry whose success depends upon the creation of more addicts and more suffering? And you're right. I mean, this is going to be a market that is controlled by these big conglomerates. And I know even in my community, I live in Hampton Township in Allegheny County, just in a 1-mile radius over the past couple of years, I've seen at least 7 or 8 smoke shops opened. And I mean, they're all over Allegheny County, and I ask why. Especially since people are not smoking cigarettes like they used to. So this is, and these shops seem to be thriving, and they sell all kinds of things. And how can this advance our society? Government has a responsibility of protecting people and protecting its citizens, and yet we're being asked to consider an industry whose success depends upon more addicts being created. In fact, there was an article in the Post-Gazette a few weeks ago on the editorial page where they talked about the number of marijuana sales that are necessary, or that will be necessary, to raise the amount of revenue that Governor Shapiro is telling us is going to be raised. So that's my question. Why would we create an industry whose financial success depends upon creating more addicts? And that's the question that no one wants to consider. Again, this can only contribute to the further breakdown of our society, especially regarding our youth.
Now, there are some that are saying with this industry, it's going to create jobs. And certainly there's the concern, like the big corporations, big tobacco coming in, but it's going to create jobs in Pennsylvania. So I guess, David, when it comes to if we open the floodgate, so to speak, of marijuana legalization, allow companies to come in and profit from the recreational sales of this drug, more on those consequences. There's areas, obviously a lot of companies need to transport things. So trucking and that type of industry is a concern. What again are some more of the concerns with regards to an employer perspective on this?
Well, it's, that psychosis is to marijuana as cancer is to tobacco. That some subset of users is going to come down with that condition. I mean, that's just a fact. And also, as we, learn more about the human mechanism and the rate of maturation, we've learned that the brain as an organ is really only fully mature around age 25. And so, again, going back to what the judge was saying, like if we as a Commonwealth allow this, and we have the mass commercialization of recreational marijuana, which is going to inevitably increase usage, where occasional users will become daily users. People who might not have indulged will do so because it's now legal. That anybody who's 25 or under, and so even if we have a legal limit at age 21, people are still, they're stunting themselves. And that with extended use, that people can be, permanently limited as to the fullness of their potential. And that, and again, you want me to put it in the frame of what employers think, but just as a Pennsylvanian, just as a human being who cares about other human beings, this is something that is not desirable. And that this is something that our state government should not be encouraging, much less abetting, and that the inevitable result is going to be fewer people who are capable of upholding the responsibilities of complex work, of work that has, how do you say, like significant consequences, things like working in a factory, driving a truck, and that all of the rest of us will suffer for that. But we suffer, one of the ways that our society will suffer is that we will not have the full contribution that citizen would have been able to make if only we had encouraged a healthier environment for that person. And so it diminishes all of us. But I just, in particular, I hurt for that person, especially a younger person, who's going to be cut off from what might otherwise be a great career in healthcare, in manufacturing, as a CDL driver. And that it's terribly irresponsible. Governor Shapiro was a bright guy. He knows better. And I just think that this is a terribly cynical ploy.
Well said. And I think you brought up the concerns that we see evidence of the developing brain at age 25 and under. And I think it's interesting, the two states that have started with this experiment, Colorado being one, but Washington State. Washington State, Seattle Times has written extensively about the concerns with high potency THC and trying to curb that and what it's doing to the developing brain. In Colorado, there's a state senator, Judy Amabile, whose son is now what she says lost because of addiction to marijuana. Started in high school, had a psychotic break, spent tens of thousands of dollars to try to help him, and he's gone, is what she says. And they're trying to advocate for things like potency limits. And there is, at least in some of these states, starting to be more recognition of the harms, particularly on the high potency. So I think it's just something that need to be recognized. There's a few questions I'd have and welcome input from all of our panelists. One is certainly when it comes to Pennsylvania, there's really kind of two competing policy proposals. One is to use the state store model with regards to the Liquor Control Board, seeing that as the vehicle to commercialize sales. Also, what we see in most states experimenting is just the open commercialization, the industry getting involved and allowing for, again, even high potency THC to be sold in various pot shops across neighborhoods, and it would be in Pennsylvania. And there's a level in both proposals of a level of increasing government. There has to be somebody, overseeing and adjusting at what are advertisements looking like, what are packagings looking like. If you guys could talk, like the growth in government and maybe some of the concerns that you'd have in seeing kind of another agency set up that is dealing with, frankly, an addictive causing drug.
So we're going to increase revenue, allegedly, and spend it on increased government. I mean, where does that get us? And the bottom line is, I know that there is disagreement between those who want to use the state store system to sell cannabis and those who want to promote private industry. But there is no right way to do a wrong thing. I mean, there just isn't. And that's the problem that they don't seem to realize. And the other thing that concerns me when I see the impact on young people, I mean, these are our future parents. These are our future taxpayers who are not really going to be contributing to society, which will further increase the deficit and the level and the degree of revenue that we're able to realize. So there just isn't any possible positive outcome at the end of the day.
Well, and I would also add that if it would be that the state store system would be the means of of distribution, that I think would preclude any local opt-out, because obviously the state store system for wine and spirits is already in every community in Pennsylvania, and that gives me great pause that local communities that do not want this would be denied the chance to say, no, we don't want this here.
And as I recall, Dr. Copeland, majority of municipalities in Colorado opted out of the sales in their communities.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a majority, but there are a large number of counties and municipalities that have decided, right, we're not going to sell it here. Like, let them sell it in Boulder County, because they want to sell it, they want to use it, but we're not going to sell it here. And of course, Pennsylvania has more local municipalities than I think any other state in the country. It would seem to me that at a minimum, there's got to be a carve out for local communities to say, no, we don't want that. But you're right, if it's on the state store model, you'd have to, I don't know how you'd appeal to get the state store removed from your district. That would certainly be a loser among voters. So yeah, I think that opt-out is really important.
If I draw attention again to the screen here, there is a number of organizations, particularly law enforcement, healthcare organizations, that are opposed to the commercialization and the legalization of marijuana for recreational purposes. From the Fraternal Order of Police, PA Chiefs of Police Association, from healthcare, American Academy of Pediatrics, a variety of organizations. And somewhat I'd get perspective, this is a rather long list, and it seems to even be growing. Why is it so long? You could look at these different areas, whether, again, law enforcement, healthcare, just more perspective on organizations that are trying to speak out to say, hey, don't do this.
Yeah, well, the thing that all those organizations have in common is that they function in the real world. And that none of this is an abstraction. If you have, police officers and doctors saying they know what they'll be facing if this comes to pass: more ER visits, more traffic accidents, and these are things that we should not want. So, that's what I see when I recognize the names on that list.
Given the large number of organizations speaking out against this, my question is, why aren't they listening?
Well, and they're choosing not to, quote, follow the science, right? The science is really clear on the short and long-term impact of marijuana usage, especially with high THC potency. And they're just not willing to look at it. The representative who says, we know it's not addictive. I'm sorry, you're not, quote, following the science in that at all. And they seem to be able to, the proponents of it seem to be able to just get away with, frankly, just ignoring the actual science on it. So back to your point about the real world, it's both the science and the experience of school counselors and safety officers and law enforcement and ER doctors and psychologists. We met a guy yesterday who's counseling young people, and he had a 17-year-old who was suffering from anxiety. Asked him, are you taking anything for it? He said, yeah, I'm doing marijuana. Well, that's precisely the wrong thing to give someone who's anxious or schizophrenic or whatever. So the real world experience of folks who are on the front lines is that this is terrible.
I think even coming to Colorado, real world experiences. I know there was a letter signed by restaurant owners in Denver to the mayor pleading for help because of what they're seeing outside their shops. And they had said, well, really, it's not a homeless problem, it's an addiction problem. And so coming, again, from Colorado, a state, as we can try to learn here in Pennsylvania, is there something that almost like rises to the top of like, this is like a top concern. This is what I'm seeing in a state experimenting with this. If you do it here in Pennsylvania, you're going to see more of that problem. What would you point to maybe in the concerns?
I think, especially in Denver, where you've got this problem, the major homelessness problem that is, I mean, largely drug-driven. The city is spending hundreds of millions of dollars on housing for the homeless, on other kinds of programs. And so they're reducing services to the rest of the citizens of Denver in order to basically care for this population that, they're in a bad situation. I don't envy their position at all. But they've become addicted, they've got easy access. And of course, in Colorado, the combined tax rate for transportation to final retail sales is something like 26%. It's a little higher than what Shapiro is proposing. But the taxes are enough higher that the black market is thriving. Either as a seller or as a buyer, why would you pay an extra 25 cents to the dollar to do that? So the argument that, well, this will just get rid of the black market is completely false. It'll still be readily available, under the table, all across the state.
And did Colorado meet their revenue projections, even whether when they started or even what it's happening right now?
Well, it's not happening now. So initially, Colorado was one of the few states to do this. So of course, they saw a nice spike, which Pennsylvania will not see, right? Part of the argument is, well, all the other states are doing it, we should do it too. Well, right, they're already, people can already buy other places. So you're not going to see sort of a unique Pennsylvania-only spike. It grew until 2021 to about $425 million a year in tax revenue. And that's, again, hundreds and hundreds of millions, billions of dollars in sales to get to that level. But now they're down to about $285 million in tax revenue. So on top of this $1.2 billion state deficit, they can't plug that with marijuana money because they've got $150 million less of that coming in. So again, there may be a rise in Pennsylvania, and certainly there'll be some increase, but depending on variable tax rates, people might still choose to shop across the border or buy illegally. So Pennsylvania, trust me, is not going to see the kind of revenue that's being projected without, as the judge said, sure, if you're going to get to $1 billion, $1.3 billion in tax revenue, you've got to sell billions of dollars of marijuana. And what if they spent that on our roads?
Well, I think someone from Western PA, you might know how our roads are. I guess one kind of final area is almost what can we do from here? What is things that both citizens, elected officials really should take heed of? And I know one in this conversation, oftentimes you say, well, do you want to legalize marijuana? And in people's minds, it's like, well, I don't want to throw somebody in jail, or I don't want to limit their medical use, so let's legalize. And I think it's important, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, really categorizes this issue into four. There's medical, there's decriminalization, there's illegal, and then, as they say, non-medical, so from a recreational perspective. And I think it's helpful to have, obviously, this kind of separation of these types of discussions. There's issues with our medical program here. We've got medical professionals that are 11,000 medical cards that they administer in a year. I don't know how you can help 11,000 people all at once in a year. It seems like there's some discrepancies there. There might be improvements to our medical system. From a decriminalization perspective, if there's improvements to our criminal justice system, that can be a discussion had separate from full legalization. So I don't know, even more on that. To have those types of compartmentalized discussions, I think is needed in this discussion.
Yeah, and there's a world of difference between decriminalization and the mass commercialization of recreational marijuana, where the Commonwealth is getting a piece of the action. I think also when it comes to expungement of folks who've had minor infractions in the past, that's also something that can and should be addressed separately. But in my mind, it's a quote from a classic movie, it's a strange game, the only winning move is not to play.
One of the questions that I find myself asking, on one hand, you're talking about decriminalizing the sale of marijuana, but on the other hand, you're going to require marijuana to be sold either through a state store system or through to private entrepreneurs who will presumably receive a state license to sell marijuana. So what happens to the people who aren't licensed? The black market is going to continue, and if those people are going to be able to function without legal penalty, then what's the point? It doesn't make sense. So from my perspective, if you're going to require people to have licenses to sell or to purchase through the state store system, then you're going to have a penalty for those who operate outside of that system. And so how does that eliminate the disparities in the criminal justice system that they claim to be so concerned about? I mean, it doesn't make sense.
I guess some final thoughts. One, I know when it comes to Colorado, when I think of whether it's a state store model, whatever model you use, what I've seen is there's more pot shops than Starbucks and McDonald's combined, I think is often said. And is that what you see? Like, what is the commercialization aspect from the billboards and the number of pot shops that you see? What are you seeing in Colorado?
Oh yeah, there's been an explosion. It used to be relatively rare to be driving down and you'd see a green cross that was an indication of a medical dispensary and so on. But now the shops have popped up everywhere. There's a popular one called Starbuds in the area. So yeah, it's also on every street corner, and maybe not surprisingly, is particularly pronounced in low-income areas. And so, I think frankly, like other kinds of effectively regressive taxes that pushing, especially for the Commonwealth, to push drug use on people who already can't afford, are having a hard time making ends meet in the first place. Now you're adding not just lottery tickets, but now you're adding the cost of buying and being addicted to it. There are a lot of families who are not gonna make it if dad and or mom and or teenagers in the household are spending a lot of income on marijuana. And that's, the advertising, makes me sick. They're aiming for 10-year-old kids, right? They want to get them hooked at an early age so they've got longer term customers of marijuana. So you're targeting kids, and frankly, you're targeting folks who really can't afford to be addicted.
It's a great point to make. It needs to be more said. What would be essentially kind of a takeaway if you're looking at our elected officials here in Pennsylvania? What would you be saying to them when they're looking at this type of proposal to commercialize marijuana in Pennsylvania?
Well, I think I've talked about the financial side. It's a bunch of largely empty promises about revenue. They're certainly back in Harrisburg next session, back in their appropriations and budget committees, trying to figure out the same question: how do we fill this gap? And now we've got additional costs associated with it. I think for their constituents, this isn't just a libertarian issue where, hey, this happens behind closed doors in your own home, that's fine. But somebody else is doing that, and the problem is they're not doing it behind closed doors, they're actually doing it while they're driving. And now they're involved in an accident, and your kids are hurt in that. So the impact on real constituents, real people across the state. And I think for those who are not representing underserved areas, there's a particular challenge. Like, are you actually making things noticeably worse for people that you're not even technically representing? Your district in some rural part of the state may not be deeply affected by it, but if you vote to harm people in other districts, you're doing great harm to the citizens of Pennsylvania. And you're not just representing your district, you're representing the entire state.
David, I'd say certainly our elected officials are real people. And yes, they're dealing with a slew of issues to try to serve Pennsylvania families. Again, what is a message that you have specifically on looking at commercialization of marijuana?
Yeah, my advice is, when you're in a hole, stop digging. That the workforce crisis already is a very significant barrier to the overall success of the Commonwealth and our economy, and as a result, state tax revenues from economic growth. and that we don't make the situation worse. Recognize that there's an enormous opportunity cost that's attached to this, and actually to elaborate on a point that you raised earlier about the medical marijuana program that during the Wolf administration, that that program was sold to the lawmakers and the voters as helping the little girl who's having seizures, helping the chemo patient to be able to to keep food down, and it struck a tone, and people of course want to be merciful to people who are suffering. But the Wolf administration dramatically expanded use of medical marijuana to things where there were already existing FDA-approved treatments. And so that's caused great confusion for employers, especially in the workers' comp space. And that I would say, until and unless those issues have been addressed by the General Assembly and the governor and the executive agencies, that nothing should happen on any expansion.
And Judge Allen, I'll give you the final word. Really, what's your message to Pennsylvania lawmakers on this issue?
Don't do it. There is no right way to do a wrong thing, and this is wrong for Pennsylvania. It's wrong for our young people. It's wrong for families. It can do nothing but cause further destruction, further breakdown of the family unit. So.
May we thank our panelists. And one final, certainly different organizations that are calling out really the concerns with this. One is Pennsylvania Family Institute. There's a website, truthonweed.com, trying to just provide more information of what is happening in other states, what is the addictive nature of marijuana. So there's a variety of resources available. Again, truthonweed.com. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you.